My name is Frank Cohen, and I am the Senior Analyst for the Frank Cohen Group, a division of Doctors Management. This is the third in our series of presentations on the Compliance Risk Analyzer, our expert system application that uses predictive analytics to create risk-based audit plans for physician organizations. In this short video, I'm going to demonstrate the AuditTrakker, an audit documentation, tracking, and real-time analytics component of the CRA. The AuditTrakker is integrated into and works hand in hand with the Compliance Risk Analyzer, which results in a significant increase in the overall efficiency and a reduction in the overall costs of your compliance efforts. In the video presentation of the CRA application, I spent a bit of time discussing the Audit Action Plan, which creates a periodic audit plan for your providers. The AuditTrakker component can be accessed directly from the AuditTrakker menu by clicking on the Provider Audit Summary. But before I go there, I wanted to quickly review the Audit Action Plan since it is so closely integrated with this report. The Audit Action Plan reports up to the top 5 risk events defined as procedure codes and modifiers for each provider based on the levels of risk selected. When the chart calculator option is invoked, the CRA makes recommendations as to the number of events or charts to be reviewed. This is where the AuditTrakker begins. Let's start by clicking on AuditTrakker and then Provider Audit Summary. This brings up a list of providers and a summary of the audits that have been entered. If I select a provider, a report will be generated that shows information for each of the audits that have been completed, including the record ID, a review date, reviewer, and whether the code was supported via both documentation and medical necessity criteria. I can enter a new audit by clicking on the Add Chart Review link for any of the individual categories. Let's go ahead and add an EM chart. Following the form, I enter the procedure code, modifier if any, the review date and the reviewer, the record number, which is optional, the patient ID, which is also optional, the date of service, and then from the drop-down, I can select the entity that coded this event. Depending on whether I enter an E&M code, non-E&M code, or modifier, the information in this section will change. Here, it is specific for an E&M encounter. The primary purpose is to determine from the audit whether the encounter met documentation criteria and/or medical necessity criteria. Let's say that for our example, documentation criteria was not met because the visit was during a post-op period and should have been a 99024 instead. But had this not been during the post-op period, let's say it would have met criteria for medical necessity. And then you can free text any notes. Maybe you would note that the follow-up was based on procedure code 49000, exploration of abdomen. You also have the option to enter the ICD codes report, and if determined to be incorrect during the audit, you can correct those ICD codes as well. Now, when you save the form, it is now logged into the table for that provider. Once you have completed entering all of the audit results for a given procedure code, you can determine whether overall that code or modifier passed or failed the audit. For example, let's say the practice audited a bunch of 99203s and found that overall, based on whatever their pass-fail criteria are, this code failed, meaning that they validated that the risk was not only statistical, but structural as well. In doing so, the application then recommends that this code for this provider be reviewed again in 3 months, or mostly at the time of the next quarterly analysis. For the 99215, the result was the opposite. Based on the same criteria, the auditor determines that even though CRA reported a statistical risk, meaning that it has a higher likelihood of an external audit, their chart review indicated that it would survive an external audit and as such marked it as no risk found. The next review date then would not occur for 12 months as a default. However, this can be overridden by the user. Once the entries are complete, we return to the audit action plan. Remember, one of the key values in having an audit management system integrated into the application is the real-time feedback that it provides. For example, an X identifies those codes that were reviewed and failed. A check mark by a code, such as here, indicates those codes are reviewed and passed. This provides a bit of a workflow tool where your auditors can track what has been reviewed and what is next. You can choose to display the reviewed items or not. For example, if you just want to show those where the risk was validated and remove those that passed the audit, select that option and click on the update. When those events are removed, it then adds additional events, when appropriate, to the top 5 list. Notice here that modifier 78 has now been added to the 5th position. Let's go ahead and take a look at the robustness of the analytics that are available. Well, let's start by going to the chart audit summary. Based on the date range selected, this report identifies, for the number of charts reviewed, the percent that passed both medical necessity and documentation criteria. Some practices use these results to schedule audit types. For example, pass rates of 80% or greater result in an annual audit, or pass rates of 60 to 80% result in a quarterly audit, and maybe pass rates less than 60% result in a 100% pre-bill audit until the situation is remedied. To see the audit detail behind the summary, just click on any line associated to any provider. Let's go ahead and look at provider 50, a cardiologist. The provider audit detail report is used when sitting down with a provider to discuss the audit results. The first page summarizes the results for each of the procedures or modifiers audited. Each subsequent page contains detail on the audit results for each of those audited items. So for example, here are the reports for 99215, 99223, 99233, 99306, and 99309. Let's move on to some of the other analytical reports. Chart audit issues by issue cross-references which providers exhibited specific issues. For example, the bubble chart shows that issue 16, medical decision making, was the #1 overall issue with some 46 events, while issue #1, incorrect procedure code, affected more providers, around 12 or 13. Subsequent pages report the detail behind the issues chart. For example, here on page 3, it shows which providers were subject to the issue E&M overcoded by 1 level, and the degree to which they were affected. The last page summarizes the findings in the prior pages of this same report. The chart audit issues by provider starts with the same bubble graph as before, but the subsequent pages report the detail as issues by provider rather than providers by issue. So for example, here we can see all of the issues that were found with provider 216's charts along with the degree to which those issues had an impact. The last page again summarizes the results of the prior pages. The chart audit issues by specialty is just like the prior 2 reports, except that it summarizes issues for each provider based on their specialty. For example, on page 2, we can see the degree to which cardiology was impacted by the different issues reported by the auditors. Tracking provider statistics is important, but we believe that it's just as important to track statistics for each auditor to ensure that there is consistency in training and reporting. This identifies the different issues reported by each auditor, and by analyzing these results, we can see whether there may be training differences or differences in how one auditor interprets the results of an audit compared to the others. For example, what if we had a situation where among 6 auditors, one consistently finds higher rates of problems with medical decision making? I mean, it could be a coincidence, but it is definitely worth examining because if it is not, then this can easily introduce noise into the model. And if there are potential audit problems, you want to be confident that they're based on the signal rather than the noise. And to assist with that analysis, we include a reviewer or auditor productivity report. This allows you to visualize the degree to which each reviewer reports specific issues and then drill down into the details of those findings. This concludes the presentation of the Audit Tracker. If you have any questions or would like to have a CRA analysis conducted with your own data, please feel free to contact me at your convenience. And thank you very much for taking the time to review this presentation.